basics, right? Just the actual slide. Okay, great. Well, anyway, I'll just go ahead and get started here. First of all, I wanted to welcome all of you. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Amy Gates. I'll be your presenter this afternoon, and I am an instructional designer over at Northeast Lakeview College. So I am Raleigh Way's counterpart over at Northeast Lakeview. So I am so happy that I have the chance to be able to attend this Palo Alto event. So welcome everyone. And so our presentation today is really going to be talking about accessibility basics, and we're really talking about the basic building blocks. So this is very foundational. Some of you may already be aware of this, but because recent events have required us to transition to distance learning, whether you teach remotely or completely online, making your course content accessible to learners is really vital right now. That's the hot topic. And you are probably now faced with the issue of how you can make your course content accessible to diverse student populations. So first of all, high five to all of you as you're trying to traverse this crazy educational landscape as it is right now and trying to keep everyone engaged. So when you think about accessibility, what do you think it means? And feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat so that Julie can read out your responses. What do you think accessibility means?
Well,
any takers?
Ensuring that the content is accessible to anybody regardless of disability.
Very good. Oh my goodness. See, I mean, that's like, you've got it. You've hit the nail on the head there. And, you know, any other thoughts? Thank you for sharing that.
I would say as a completely online teacher, that they can access me on a timely basis, that they know how to get a hold of me and how that I will respond to them in a certain amount of time.
Oh, there you go. Okay, setting those expectations, right, as far as, very good. Thank you very much for sharing.
And in the chat, Sylvia says that she thinks accessibility means that the content of our courses can be understood by students of all abilities.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you very much. And you guys are right. Hit the nail on the head. A lot of times people think of accessibility to, I mean, the common theme sometimes, and I think you're like a step ahead of that because you're looking at the broader spectrum. But what quickly comes to mind, you know, in general, when people think of accessibility, they think of accommodations, right? They think of physical or maybe cognitive needs of a student. Usually instructors are you know, notified ahead of time, or sometimes not so ahead of time, that there is a student that needs special accommodations. Yes, that's accessibility, but it's just one small aspect of it. And as some of you had already mentioned, accessibility includes a wider range of needs that may be temporary, could be environmental, or could even be personal. So I'll move on to the next slide and I'll show you what we will be covering today. So our webinar objectives today, by the end of this webinar, hopefully you can see the slide, you'll be able to identify the difference between the term accessibility and accommodation. And I think some of you have already, you're well on your way to understanding that, but it's always good to just reiterate the difference between the two and explain how principles of universal design for learning, some of you are very familiar with that as well, also known as UDL, and how it promotes accessibility within a course. We will also look at key elements to consider when you are trying to make your course accessible. Again, really basic, basic key elements. And then last but not least, we're going to look at some really easy to use Canvas tools that are built right into the LMS that can help you identify some accessibility issues in your course content. So everyone good with that? That is going to be our aim for this particular webinar. So accessibility. we started talking about it. What is it? Well, it's design that focuses on what you can do beforehand. And again, that's using principles of universal design to really address the needs of all types of learners. I think someone even mentioned that earlier, whether they have a disability or not. So it is really more proactive rather than reactive. So you're kind of thinking a few steps ahead, looking at some of the things that you can do with your course content to make it accessible ahead of time. Any questions so far? Everyone good? I'll move to the next slide. So as we talked about earlier, accessibility can take many forms. And as you can see, this is the more traditional form where it is more physical or sensory or cognitive, those types of issues where there is maybe a medically documented reason for trying to level the playing field for this particular learner so that they can succeed. But then there's also another factor to consider is the temporary. And that could be due to an injury. It could be due to some type of temporary physical limitation that a learner may encounter during the middle of the semester. Pardon me. But again, when we talked about proactive design in order to make your course accessible, sometimes these things happen mid-semester. And when you think about it thoughtfully ahead of time, you don't have to pivot as quickly. And you're a little bit more prepared for these temporary or unplanned types of things. And last but not least, there's situational. And what I mean by that is it could be environmental factors. So think about people that study. You know, sometimes they might study on a train or on a bus or on the airplane. Boy, I sound like Dr. Seuss. You know, or a very noisy environment or very quiet environment. And looking at those modes environmentally, you want to make your content accessible. So amazingly, you know, we use closed captioning. It's very convenient when we have it, whether we have a disability or not. So the environmental conditions are something to keep in mind, as well as life changes. People have babies, people have children, different life situations can happen that may affect a student's ability to access certain content. And of course, last but not least, unfortunately it happens, but there's age-related limitations that may have to be considered as far as making things accessible. So those are some of the things to consider first of all. And then I'm actually going to show you a short video in a moment, but does anyone have any questions or do they have any comments so far on the material that was presented? If not, we will move on. I'll give you a moment. Looks like we're good. All right. So what I wanted to do is move on to this next. It's very good. Some of you have already seen it. It is a video that comes out of the University of North Carolina, but it very succinctly and very well clarifies the issue about accessibility versus accommodation. So I will play that video for you right now, and just make sure, you just let me know if it plays correctly for you. So I'm just going to link to it. Is everyone able to see this screen, the YouTube screen? Yes?
Yes. Well,
Okay.
It hasn't started yet, but
Okay,
it did
perfect.
switch screens.
Perfect. All right. I'm going to enlarge it. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Accessibility and accommodation, two terms that are often
We can hear
associated
it,
with
too.
one another,
Okay.
are actually two very different concepts. To help you better understand the difference between them, let's start by talking about the one with which you may already be familiar. Have you ever been asked to give a student extended time on a test, or been asked to wear a microphone so a student with a hearing impairment could more clearly hear you? If so, then you are providing an accommodation. Accommodations are intended to level the playing field for students with disabilities. In order to receive an accommodation, a student must have a medically documented disability and must register with your university's Disability Support Office. The staff there will meet with the student to determine which accommodations will be appropriate. Some other examples of accommodations in higher education include taking tests in a separate setting, having a note taker or permission to record lectures, and using a sign language interpreter. Accessibility, on the other hand, refers to a set of design standards developed by the World Wide Web Consortium to ensure online materials are available to everyone, regardless of the means by which the content is acquired. So what does that mean? Well, if you think about it, there's lots of ways people can access online materials. They can use a computer, smartphone, tablet, or glasses. But how might the experience be different for people who are unable to see or hear the content? How might this change the experience of an online class? There are actually many assistive technologies available that make accessing online materials possible for people with vision, hearing, or mobility impairments. For example, a student with a vision disability may use a refreshable braille display or a screen reader to access an online course.
Course: creating accessible documents. Heading list dialog. Heading list view. Navigation: administration: 2. Enter. Heading level 2 administration.
If the course was created with accessibility in mind, then it would be just as easy for the student using assistive technology to navigate and receive information from the course as it would be for a peer with no impairment. Accessibility guidelines define how materials intended for the online environment should be designed. Some of the guidelines include consideration for color and contrast, building structure into a page, providing a text representation of images, captioning videos, and creating descriptive hyperlinks. So, to sum up the difference between accommodation and accessibility, if we think of an accommodation as assistance intended to help one student succeed, then accessibility proactively ensures online materials meet the needs of a diverse audience.
There you go.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, anyway, as you can see, as far as accessibility and accommodation, accommodations really are those one-off things that you want to handle in terms of helping one student succeed, but where accessibility is more set on design standards that will help you make that content accessible regardless of whether a person has a disability or not. And it really addresses a diverse audience. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on some of those elements that they had mentioned earlier in regards to color, contrast, structure, and everything like that. So going on to the next slide. So we talked about universal design. So what is it? What is universal design, known as UDL? It's really it's just a way of designing learning so it can be accessed by all. Basically, it addresses the why, and the why being what's in it for me from the learner perspective. Sorry about that. And that actually, it offers context so learners really can self-regulate and persevere and basically hang in there. I mean, if they know why and it's relevant, they will persevere. But if they don't, and it's arbitrary, that's where it's a little harder, right, for them to continue that engagement. Secondly, it's the representation of the what. So it really allows them to perceive how your content or information is represented. Excuse me, it could either be through language, those mediums of expression, it could be written, it could be pictorial, it could be auditory. So it's the way they take in that information, the what. And then last but not least, there's also the action and expression, the how. So many of you with your classes, you have assessments and those types of things, and it's your way of gauging how much they're actually mastering or how much they're internalizing. So the action and expression is the how. How can those learners show you and prove that they can respond to you, they can give feedback, they can receive feedback, and also monitor the progress as well as those as the learners continue and progress through the class. Sorry about that, I keep trying to clear my throat. Any questions so far just on the principles of UDL? I do have a link when I give this slide to you. you will also get all of the links in terms of looking at more information on the Universal Design Guidelines as defined by CAST. It's an organization that it's called the Center for Applied Special Technology, CAST, like you have a cast on your arm. They coined that phrase in terms of universal design for learning just because they originally they were a research organization that really focused on learners that had physical and cognitive needs, and so they looked at different ways that they could do create assistive technology to help them. But what they discovered is that assistive technology actually benefited all learners as a result of that. So I think they have a great website, and that link that I have there will actually link to their website. So you can feel free to explore that after this webinar is over.
There is one question in the chat, Amy.
Yes.
Could you say more about age-related limitations? Perhaps the video would answer this question.
And actually, thank you very much for asking that. And it could be the age-related limitations. Again, it could be a vision, issue. It could be, a lot of times it could be physical. Sometimes it may be cognitive as a result of that. But a lot of times it's either physical, in terms of someone who may have a hard time typing, due to some physical condition that's age-related, those types of things. That's what I was referring to as age-related types of issues. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. All right. So now that we looked at the Universal Design Guidelines, so that's kind of like something to keep in mind. Those guidelines really help you create things that keep accessibility at the forefront. So what are the factors that we have to consider? So now you're saying, okay, Amy, I get it. We got the theory here in terms of what might be best to really look at accessibility, but I need the nuts and bolts. So what do I have to do in my class? Bottom line, you just tell me what I need to do to make it accessible. Well, these are the factors to consider. Navigation. Good, and I'll go into this in more detail in the subsequent slides, but think of navigation. When you go into a grocery store, you kind of want to know the lay of the land, right? So that number one, you don't spend too much money or you don't get lost, and you want to be able to find the item that you want to buy. Or think about a book without a table of contents and trying to find that information. So navigation in your course is key, a key factor in making it accessible for your students. Secondly is readability. Not only is it easy on the eyes, but I'll go into more detail on what you can do to make it more readable and easy to see in terms of the presentation of it. We spend so much time online now, so there's a lot of eye fatigue. So readability is a big factor. Second, accessible text and images. As you saw from the video, not everybody is a sighted, student. So we love our pictures. Pictures are 1,000 words, but again, if someone can't see them, how do they know it's there? And what do we need to do to alert them to the fact that there is a picture there and what it is? And last but not least, accessible videos. So videos are great. I know a lot of you, I use it as well. You use YouTube, you use any kind of video that's online that you might want to include in your class to kind of add depth and perspective and just to change it up a little bit. But remember, if you've got learners that can't access it, if there's no closed captioning and they can't hear, well, that is certainly going to be a barrier in terms of accessibility as well. So I'll focus on each of these. Navigation, when we think of navigation, it just means it facilitates ease of use and movement throughout the course. So we want material or content that's consistent. you know, and have a logical format. I mean, I'll use modules as an example, but, you know, as far as basically it's chunking the material in a way that makes sense to the learner, as opposed to it's just pretty much, you know, a kitchen sink of stuff. It's like, oh, here's all your resources. Well, you know, they really do need to have, you know, some kind of rhyme or reason as to where things are and the fluidity in which they're supposed to, or sequence that they're supposed to go through that material. The second thing is self-described links. It's very, very helpful to provide URLs so that you can give people the source, you know, of that information. However, that's okay for us, you know, that are sighted, but imagine if you use a screen reader. With a screen reader, oftentimes when they read the URL, and I'll give you samples, it will read it by the letter. So imagine if you had a lot of links in your course that are URL links. Imagine how it would feel to someone who has to listen to the screen reader read out every letter of that HTTP : / and so on and so forth. And this is pretty self-explanatory. You don't want broken links because we've all encountered them, and you know how frustrating that is, especially if the link is vital to the student being able to see what's in that link and then do an assignment. And last but not least, directional features. As I said, you know, a start here. So I'll give you some samples in this next slide. So you can do navigational cues. You know, you could do it. It doesn't have to be a start here button, but you can actually just give them textual cues. Hey, start here, and then from here, go to your left course navigation and click modules, or whatever you want to say to direct them through a sequence of events. So it's really important for them to have some kind of navigational cue in your course. This is what I was talking about, is the self-describing links. So rather than the HTTP ... colorblindAwareness.org, you could actually just rename the link. So it's a little bit easier for the screen reader to read. So those are some of the examples that I wanted to show you. And of course, you don't want any broken links in terms of navigation. So any questions so far? Anything in the chat? I don't see anything in the chat.
No, there's nothing in the chat.
Okay, all right. So moving on, the next thing that I wanted to talk about is readability. Again, these are basic, but you know, it's so funny how you talk about basics and those types of things, and people say, you know, just like weight loss. It's like, hey, I know this is what I need to do, but sometimes we always overlook it and we forget about it. And so we're going to focus on readability, and again, you just minimize the distractions. So you want to organize your material or organize your course content in such a way that they just, you know, it's easy for them to take in. Good organization, and maybe it's broken up in sections to make it palatable and consumable. Appropriate use of color and contrast, I think that's a big deal in terms of eye fatigue and those types of things. Good use of white space and easy to read fonts. And so what I'll do is I'll give you some samples. Again, too much text, you know, I get it. You know, sometimes it's really hard depending on the discipline of your course. Sometimes it is hard to get away from a lot of text just because it might just be complicated and in-depth material. That's okay. You know, that's understandable. But what you want to do is maybe break it up in a format so that it is easier to digest, so that it's easier to read as far as the student is concerned. The other thing I wanted to bring out is color contrast. Colors are wonderful. They set a tone, but again, think of those people who are colorblind. So just say you use color for emphasis, saying, you know, by the way, you know, the due date of this exam, and then you've got it in red, is November 30th, 2020. Well, imagine someone who may not be able to distinguish the difference between the red and the black. And so color, just for emphasis, is something that you might want to avoid. Maybe you could bold it, you know, in addition to that, so that they could see that it's set apart, you know, from the rest of the text. But again, color contrast as well. So if you've got colors that blend in too easily with the background, that makes it hard on a reader as well. The next thing I wanted to show you, fonts. Are your fonts difficult to read? Again, fonts are great. They actually, you know, sometimes they're fun. You know, I mean, how many times have you done like Halloween flyers and you want the spooky font, or, you know, you want to set a tone, you know, just with your letters and text. But what you need to remember is it difficult to read? And are there too many of them? So sometimes we can go into font overload. You know, for a variety of things, you want to express this, you know, you want a happy font or whatever it may be, but that can be distracting if you have a lot of different fonts on one page. And are they too small, or are they too narrow? Is it hard to read that way? Or are they, you know, or are they too light in color? As you can see from that, the contrast is hard. So as I said, this kind of reiterates what I said earlier, is blocks of text. Maybe bulleting, you know, if you needed to, or just spacing things out a little bit more in terms of content and sectioning it better, so that they're not, you know, presented with just a huge block of text, which sometimes people, their minds just shut off, you know, and they're saying, I'm not going to read this, it's too much. So I've also linked to this particular website, which is really good as well, and she gives a lot more information on readability. Any questions so far, just on the readability section of this presentation? Again, just very practical. It's pretty pragmatic, but sometimes it's things that you just forget about, you know, as you're trying to build your course.
Amy, what are some go-to fonts? And what are colors to absolutely avoid?
Okay, very good question. You know, the reds and the greens, you know how you have that red in Canvas where, you know, it's the Canvas red? You want to avoid that, because that is actually not an accessible color. And I'm so glad that you asked that, Julie, because a lot of you are thinking, well, what in the heck? You know, I mean, what colors am I supposed to have? Some kind of color wheel and figure out, you know, what the heck, you know, what color am I supposed to, you know, make my font? Well, the thing is, there is a built-in color analyzer in Canvas. So you may decide, hey, I want this green, and go ahead and type it in, and, you know, you've got it in bold. And the accessibility checker that I'll show you a little later will actually analyze it, and will just say, hey, it's good, it works. But usually if you're trying to, you know, the blues and greens and the reds and greens, I mean, those are, sometimes it's hard for someone to distinguish between the two. So if you're ever going to emphasize something, maybe what you might want to do is just bold that material instead of making it a different color. And that might help them, you know, let it pop a little bit
So
more.
is it better to just avoid color and use bold instead?
You know, the thing is, you don't necessarily have to avoid it altogether, but just say if you had, if you use a color, but you bold that color with it, that should be okay too, because it will, you know, for a sighted reader, they'll see a bold green, you know, and that's okay. But for someone who may be colorblind, they'll still see that it's bold. So, you know, if you use the two in combination with each other, that would be helpful. But I would, as a caveat to that, I wouldn't use too much color. Have you ever gone on a page and there's like 5 different colors, and it's really distracting from a learner perspective, because then they're saying, am I supposed to be paying attention to that? What is the difference between this pink and this blue? I mean, if they can discern the difference, what is the difference between them? So just to be really thoughtful in the way you use color on a page. You can certainly use it. It's not to say that you can't, but always make sure that it is used in tandem with another, you know, like a bolding or maybe an italicized something, just so that they can see the difference, so that it's not just based on color. So great question. Thank you for asking that. Any others? I'll check the chat. I don't see anything.
A go-to font. What's a good font to use?
Oh, go-to fonts. Yes. I mean, Calibri is good. And I'll just tell you this, you know, the fonts that tend not to have tails on them, you know, usually the straight fonts, you know, you've got like this one here is like Century Gothic. You've got Arial, that's pretty good. You know, you've got Calibri, that's really good. And I think I can actually send you to a link of, you know, maybe nice fonts to use. But usually it's the ones that don't, you know, don't have all these fancy serifs or whatever at the end. So that's just helpful. It's just cleaner.
Thank you. I
You're
also
very
just wanted to do a time check. We're at 2:10.
Okay, thank you so much for letting me know. And I'm almost done too, so then I just wanted to make sure that we had enough time for any kind of questions at the end. So thank you for being such a great proctor there. I really appreciate it. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about is accessible for as far as the variables. You're looking at text and images. So you just want to make sure that it's accessible to all learners. So again, textual representation of images. You don't want scanned material. I know some of you are super helpful and you're saying, hey, you know, I have this great piece of paper here that, you know, I just don't have a digital version of it, but I'm going to scan it and I'm going to upload it and put it in a file in my course. But remember, can everyone read it and access it? So scanned material, just kind of think about that. There is a way to make scanned material searchable, so there's a number of tools to do that as well. And then, of course, formatting using styles in word processing software, and I'll go into a little bit more detail and kind of show you what I mean. So accessible text and images, it's nice to have pictures, right? Pictures are worth 1,000 words. I mean, she makes me chuckle. She looks like most of the students today. Images really help convey concepts, but if a person can't see it, you know, it's important to provide a short description of what it represents. And it's important to consider the experience of those with visual impairments when using images. Many times surrounding text around the image may already describe it, so you might be good. But imagine if you just put this on here and, you know, of course it makes you chuckle because it reminds you of a lot of our children or a lot of our students. But for someone who's not sighted, it really would be helpful to describe it succinctly. You know, it's a bored young female student with a book. Just a suggestive text. What I thought I would also add too, because that's a simple one, right? You're like, yeah, that's an easy one, Amy, but let's look at this. So imagine you put that in your class, and this is courtesy of Pearson Education. I just wanted to show you something that's a little bit more complex. So you're thinking, holy moly, and that's going to be like 5 paragraphs, you know, of stuff. And this is an appropriate descriptor. You know, it is, it's showing the 5 communication principles. And the reason why it's appropriate, because in that textbook, what it did is it presented that image, but below it in the text itself, in the actual paragraphs that followed, it actually described it and went over what adapt means and what aware means. What's important is that the screen reader knows that there was an image there and the image was of this. And then they can go on to read what that image meant in detail. So I just thought, you know, it's just helpful to see some examples. And then, of course, as I said, scan documents. You just want to make sure that they're readable for screen readers. I think those are one of the things that we tend to forget about. You know, you love the pictures. And plus, too, you don't want pictures that are described as female.jpg. Sometimes that, you know, pulls in when you actually insert it in Canvas. But you want to be able to describe that image. She's bored, you know, she's a young bored female student, as opposed to female.jpg. What does that mean? It's just the type of file it is. So any questions there? I'll continue to move on so that we can have some time to ask questions at the end. Everybody good?
Special software for screen readers to read scanned documents.
Yes, I mean, they actually, so it really depends on, a lot of times they would be working with the Office of Disability Services. So in these instances, when they are using screen readers, they probably will be going through the Office of Disability Services. I know there's Kurzweil, there's JAWS, you know, those are the, I know Kurzweil is what we offer through Alamo Colleges. It's free for people who want to use it. Some people like to use different, and then there's NVDA, which is like a, it's also a free screen reader that you can just upload into your computer. And basically, there is some amount of a learning curve to it. So again, to be honest, I think it's easy. The software that you would use, it's not like it's going to be something that we expect you to run it through a screen reader because I think even sometimes the non-sighted people that don't use it very often, or maybe low vision people that don't use it very often, sometimes these screen readers are, you know, there is a high learning curve to them as well. But there is special software that allow, you know, you hover over it, you tab, you know, you use your keyboard and it'll just read the next section. It'll tell you what it is. It's pretty amazing stuff. So thank you for asking that question. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about again is just the accessible videos. As you know, multimedia content is a, you know, it's important. It adds depth to our class, but you just want to pick those ones that actually do have captions on them. Sometimes you have the choice, you know, when you're looking at YouTube, just knowing that they have that CC captioning on there so that anybody who cannot hear or the deaf students are able to be, you know, to make sense out of the video itself. Or sometimes they'll just provide transcripts, and that's okay as well. Any questions on that? And then I'll go on to some Canvas tools because you're saying, hey, this is great. But I do see that, you know, there's a lot of interest in, hey, well, then how can I fix that? What do I do? Show me how. I'm just going to skip past this slide. I think it's a duplicate slide here. So here's the Canvas tools. Easy to use Canvas tools, and some of you are probably familiar with them as well. But the first one is Student View. Many of you know what Student View is, but sometimes it's so easy to forget. You just, you know, what's nice about this is it really helps you with a quick click. You can actually look at your course through the eyes of a student. You know, sometimes you get so wrapped up in what you're putting into there and pages and all that kind of stuff. We'll go over each one of these in the next few slides. So Student View, there is a link validator. So what it does is it checks all the links in your course. And it could check links for only published materials, or it could check links for published and unpublished, or files. So you actually can filter and make that determination on what you want to have checked in your course. What's nice is we talked about this earlier, we sort of alluded to it when we were talking about color, is the accessibility checker. This is nice because it does a real high-level check of your course content. It looks at images, it looks at your tables, it looks at your color on each of your pages. So it's really convenient. It's a nice convenient tool to have and easy to use. And then there's editing tools, and these are the formatting tools in Canvas. So many of you, you know, when you're putting your content in Canvas, you have to click edit, right? And then from there you just cut and paste, or you just type in directly. But above it, there's a toolbar. It looks similar to Word, and it's called the Canvas Rich Content Editor, and that assists with accessibility, and I can show you how that helps with accessibility. So with that being said, let's look at the student view. You want to check out what students see, and it helps because it shows, you know, you might have a lot of stuff in there, but you can just see from a navigation standpoint what a student will encounter when they see it, when you see it through student view. And you can also check to see if your stuff is published. That is one of the biggest things that we always encounter, is that you said, I have it, the assignment's there, and the student is saying, but I don't see it. Well, maybe you forgot to publish it. So, it's a good self-check as well. And then, of course, you've got readability. And the way to get to this is you just go to your home page in Canvas. And on the right-hand side, you'll see this little menu, and you'll see Student View with the little glasses. You click on it, and it will immediately take you into Student View. And you can actually see your course that way. All right, and I'm keeping note of the time too, so I'd like to leave some time for questions, but I'll move on if that's okay. The next one is the link validator. You conveniently can check all the links in your course, as I mentioned, and what's nice about this is it ensures that your links are up to date. You know how sometimes in YouTube, sometimes they take the video down and the link is no longer valid. So it ensures that the content's up to date. It identifies any kind of broken link as well. What's nice about this is all you have to do is go to your settings in your left navigation, and then from there on the right side there's a validate links link, and it'll check everything in your course. And you're able to filter as well. Maybe you just want to check the links on your published content, and so it'll just check the links there. Okay. And then the Canvas accessibility checker, it checks for color contrast. It checks for tables. A lot of times when you put tables in, you always want to name your table so that someone with a screen reader knows there's a table and there's a bunch of information that is organized in such a way as to convey meaning in that table. So don't ever use a table just for formatting. So you know how sometimes you say, gosh, I just want columns, but I'm going to make all the lines invisible so it looks all pretty. But a screen reader looks at that as a table, and so it'll say, well, what is it? What is this a table of? When it's really not a table of anything. It's more a formatting tool. So those are some of the things that you want to consider. And then it looks for image alt text information. So if you have a picture on that page, it'll tell you, hey, there's no name on this thing. You might want to describe it. And the other thing too is this accessibility checker, it doesn't check your entire course. It checks the page that you're on when you're in edit mode. So kind of goes page by page as you go on. The way you find it is when you are in edit mode. See how you're in the rich content editor here as you're entering material. It's the little person that's in a circle. And if you click on that, it'll actually do an analysis of your page.
I have a question in the chat, Amy.
Okay.
What do we do then if we want to use a table for formatting? Are tables okay, or? Tables
are okay. So just say, here's a good example. Just say you wanted to make a table of your, just say you have a variety of times for your virtual office hours, and it may not always be on the same day. And rather than kind of put it, you want to put it in a table, that's okay because you're formatting it. But as long as you name it like virtual office hours table, then the screen reader would know, okay, this is a table. Now just say you're just writing text, and you're saying, geez, I don't like the way this text looks. I want it to look like 2 columns of text. And so what some people will do is they'll create a table, and then they'll make the lines invisible, and then they'll type the text in, and they get this, these beautiful little columns on each side of each other. It looks good, but it's not really a table. It's more of a formatting issue. But if you're doing a table to organize information, saying, hey, here's a table on, times, or here's a table on the different terms, and those types of things, those are totally okay as long as you indicate what that table is. I hope that makes sense. Okay. And So lastly, there's the Canvas editor. So a lot of times when you said, Amy, what does it mean when you say use formatting tools? It doesn't make sense to me. Well, how many, and you know, many of you use Word, right? Microsoft Word. How many of you, and you don't have to raise your hands or say anything, because I used to be guilty of this all the time. You open up a document, it's blank. You start typing. And then, of course, you go down the page and you go, oh, you know what, this is a separate section, and this is the head of another section. I'm just going to enlarge the font and make it bold and start typing and typing and typing. Well, from a screen reader perspective, it's all one long line of text. So yes, they know it's bold, but I'll show you what we mean by formatting. Use of a heading format, and you'll see a picture of it, and the tools that you have in Canvas to insert content. So let me show you an example. This is very similar to Word in that it defaults to the paragraph. So when you're putting stuff in, you know, and you can actually enlarge the font, you can make it bold, you can do all these kinds of things. And for a sighted person, it makes sense. You just made a different section. But what is more appropriate is if you're going to go to a different section, you should actually name it as a header. It is a header to a different section. So a screen reader looks at that as a signpost, and it's a navigational cue for the screen reader to say, hey, you know what, this section is ended. Now we're looking at a different section. And that way, if a non-sighted reader wanted to find something, it's almost like using a table of contents. They're going, I need to go to this section, as opposed to, you know, trying to sift through all the text to find what they need. So again, we ignore this a lot, but we can have subsequent webinars too that kind of go a little bit more in depth on how you can make your Word documents, your PDF documents accessible as well by using some of these types of tools that are embedded within the tool itself. So with that being said, in summary, what we discussed is accessibility versus accommodation. Accessibility is the larger umbrella of making it accessible to everyone, disability or no disability, and accommodation, which is really helping one student succeed, and it's a one-off. Usually it's, you know, cognitive, physical, you know, disabilities, those types of accommodations that get brought to our attention. Principles of universal design, the why, you know, what's in it for me, the what, how, you know, what is it that I'm actually looking at, and how am I going to be able to show my instructor, or how is the instructor going to be able to determine whether I've internalized the material. And key elements to consider regarding accessibility, you know, you're looking at color, you're looking at alternative text, you're looking at making sure there's captioning, those types of things, and navigation, and then some easy to use Canvas tools that identify accessibility issues within your course content. So I just thought, it's 2:26, but I just thought this was such an appropriate little video, and all of you have wonderful content in your course, but when it is not accessible, they can't really appreciate, you know, what you do. So I just thought I would play this for you. I won't make you watch the whole thing, but, you know, like I said, again, this presentation will be made available to you. There are some resources that I have noted on here that I have cited, so I'll make sure that you also get this as well. And I just really, really thank you for just your engagement and the questions that you have. Any other questions? I know we have like 2 or 3 minutes left, but I'd be more than happy to entertain any questions.
Sylvia, do you want to unmute and talk about the your issue with tables?
Sure. Okay, am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
That's good. No, basically like what I just did in my own course, I'm teaching some Flex 1 courses.
Okay.
Yes, right. That's an issue into and of itself. But anyway, I wanted my students to know the deadlines for their upcoming essays. So
Oh, okay.
So I like to lay them out, like the date, the description of the assignment, or not the date. I do the assignment number, the description, and then the date. So I might have a 3-column table.
Oh, and that's okay.
But it's not really a table, but sometimes when I do the accessibility checker, it will say, oh, you need a table. I've had that,
okay.
before.
And you know what, or it'll just ask you what is the name of the table, because they might ask you what do those columns signify, and as long as you say the columns at the top horizontally are the titles to the table, then you're good. If you click yes, it'll just take it away and it will not show up as an error anymore.
Okay.
I can, we can certainly show you, but yeah, what you had there, that's appropriate. I think that's perfectly appropriate to put it in a table format.
Well, now, Miss Gates, I know you're not at my college, but can I call on you to assist me with my online course?
Well, there's Raleigh Way, who is my counterpart. He's waving
Hi,
at you.
Mr. Way. I'm not at your school either.
Oh, where are you?
I'm
Well, you can certainly, I would be more than happy to work with you, Sylvia. What college are you?
with San Antonio College.
Oh, okay. We do have an instructional designer there too. Her name is Nadia Shelby. And thank you, Raleigh, if you wanted to put in the chat, but she can certainly help you as well. But feel free, if you want additional information, I'll be more than happy to share that information with you as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And you too, Mr. Way. I forgot. I didn't realize we had 2 designers on board.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Oh, but
Nadia
anyway,
can help you. She'd be glad to help you.
Yes,
Thank you.
She
Thank
certainly can. She's great. And so in any case, I just want to say thank you so much. And, thank you, Julie and Raleigh. I mean, and Mallory, all you people over at Palo Alto. I really appreciate just having the opportunity to collaborate with all of you.
Thank you for working with us.
Yes, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. I think it laid out a lot of the basics of things we need to consider when reviewing our courses. I think you've given us also, my wheels are spinning on what the next sessions can be, and I think you've laid out outlines for us.
Oh yeah, we can take a deeper dive,
Thank
single
you.
out different things.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for attending. Please complete the survey. I'll follow up with an email on Monday with the presentation and a link to the recording.
I will add that if somebody has a question at PAC, give me a call.
Yeah.
Or Mallory.
Yes, I'm here as the Canvas support as well.
Oh, wonderful. And I'll send the PDF copy to you, Julie and Raleigh.